Okay, so welcome to the first of my critical thinking series, and this one looks at perception. The issue here is that if you're going to think critically, you have to know what you're thinking critically about. That is, what are you perceiving that is worth thinking about? If we can get perception understood well, a lot of the other things begin to make sense because a lot of our errors in thinking start with errors in perception. So let's look at perception. If I can get a page down. There we go. Okay, you're not giving me my page down. So here's a brief definition of perception. That is, it's the process of organizing sensory data. That's it. Just, you've got lots of sensory data. Things are coming at you in overwhelming waves. There's far more happening around you than you can process, more than you can absorb, analyze, or respond to. So you have to convert this sensory data into a perception to be useful. That is, you have to have some way of organizing this sensory data, and perception is what is the outcome of that organizing. That is, if there's no organizing, it's just random noise. Or maybe not quite random noise, but pretty noisy anyway. But once you have a perception, it means that it's no longer noise. You have a focus. You have materials that you are perceiving, and the rest just becomes background. It gets shut out. So it's this process of shifting between everything and what things are coming through that you're going to work with and the things that are important to you. Now, how does this take place? And this is an interesting issue because if we understand how the brain functions to process data and turn it into perception, we're on our way to getting a good sense of how perception works and the strengths and weaknesses of perception. So perception emerges from memory and intuition. That is, it is about the way our brain processes reality unconsciously, in heavily taken from memory, but not purely in terms of memory. That is, it isn't a match between memory and whatever that creates perception, but that's certainly a part of it. That is, it has to do with, hang on here, we've got one more student. It has to do with how we put these things together in such a way that we have a sense of what's going on in the world around us now. So the basic issue is that data must be organized to be meaningful. That is, data, if you look at it in basic digital sense, ones and zeros, well, ones and zeros are plentiful and they mean nothing. That is, you have to have them organized as code with a system, and then they can become useful. That's the simplest way. And if you look at the world around you, you've got an amazing amount of material coming at you, visually, audio, physical senses, and what does it mean? Well, the answer is nothing until you've got some organizing principle. So let me just. So that means to get there, we unconsciously, and that's a critical part of it, that this is unconscious, look for specific environmental cues, things that will tell us what is going on around us. And that could be the location. Are we in a familiar location? My standard example is you look at a room with a bunch of people sitting in rows and four walls and somebody standing up front, and you know it's some kind of lecture. You just know it. That is, the location itself tells you how you should be organizing the information. It doesn't tell you what kind of lecture. It doesn't tell you if it's important. It just tells you this is what it is. Your feelings are important. That is, what is your body telling you about this space, which is interoception. This is a critical part of how we approach the world. That is, our bodies themselves are a part of how we interpret things. That is, if all of a sudden we feel sick when we enter a space, then we take that really seriously as identifying there's something wrong here. There's a caution. It could be that it's low frequency sound that is upsetting our system. You know, the ventilation fan in the background. But it doesn't matter. Our body responds to that and gives us clues or cues to what is going on in the space. Another critical piece is the behavior of others. How are they acting? We're deeply sensitive to how other human beings behave. And that's a critical part then of how we perceive the world around us. That is, we use other people as an early warning system, as an identifier of what kind of situation things are, to how we should behave, whether or not we fit. Lots of stuff goes on just from observing others. And then, of course, there's the cognitive. You may have been told something like you are going to a class. Okay, so this is what a class looks like. This might be a class in Canada versus a class in a different country, where in class in Canada, you might be sitting in a circle with a maximum of 20 people. You know, it's a good seminar room, very common Canadian university teaching environment, but might be one that you've never seen before. And it's being told that it is a class that tells you this is a class. That is, you've got the past information, or you walk in and somebody says, welcome to the class. So this is what it is. That is, you've got a cognitive clue that tells you how to frame what you're doing. And then last, and oddly enough, just whatever has been running through your head before you enter the situation also becomes part of the way you organize the behavior, your understanding of what's going on. That is, your perceptions are also somewhat based on just whatever is happening in the past, the immediate past, that it sets you up. So that you can be profoundly disoriented by that, in fact, because none of these are necessarily accurate. And that's a critical piece. But together, they provide the clues or the cues that tell us what is going on, what is our situation, that is, what is the perception that we should be forming. So I hope that makes sense. These are all unconscious. They are emerging from us, ourselves, in terms of our memory and our intuition. And we use them then to organize what we're seeing, feeling, smelling, tasting, whatever. And it's amazingly powerful stuff, the way it works, that you can actually see somebody's perceptions shift by providing them a clue or a cue that allows them to organize the information in a way that makes sense. That is, they're experiencing something that they can't tell what is going on, and all of a sudden you can just see they catch something, and they just relax, they get it, they understand. So it's really quite fascinating to see how this works. And it's all unconscious. This is not about thinking. This is more about, in a certain sense, intuition, the unconscious patterning of our lives that allow us to make sense of things. And it's a good thing that it takes place unconsciously, because if we were to try and do this stuff consciously, it would take us forever, because the data can be very ambiguous, hard to figure out. Which is a correct cue to what's going on? What are the things that give us the clues? Can be quite difficult. And if we're sitting down and thinking about it, we don't necessarily get it right away, and we'll have to take our time. But our unconscious says, well, you just have to make a judgment. You just have to decide. You have to behave. You have to know. And so it gives us a pattern, it tells us this is what's going on, and then off we go. So this is the background, how we start forming a perception, but we're far from done with what a perception is. Perceptions don't come as isolated kind of fractional units. They come as wholes. That is, they come with a whole group of things that come with them. That is, if I perceive that I have entered into a classroom, what do I mean by that? Well, that tells me about how I should be prepared, what I should expect to happen next, what I should expect to do in terms of my immediate behavior, what my long-term behavior is, what the behavior of other people should be. That is, the moment I enter a classroom, I have entered what is a frame of reference. That is, it's a large-scale organizational pattern that tells me what to attend to, what I need to do, what is going on around me. And so these frames of reference are the critical pieces that allow us to perceive. That is, what is a classroom? A classroom is not this arbitrary thing. A classroom is a whole collection of behaviors, opportunities, problems, things that need to be solved, things that are solutions, things we can expect to experience. And it's just laid out there based again heavily on our memory of such things, but not just our memory. That is, it's also a cognitive anchor that allows us to start thinking our way through it. So when I enter a classroom, then I have a whole specific set of questions that would emerge that help me to understand, well, where am I going? What am I doing? What do I want? That is, it isn't that it answers all of the issues, that it even poses the questions that are appropriate for this environment. What kinds of problems are we likely to be solving in this place? Again, we have many of these frames of reference. That is, every part of our life, we have and maybe perhaps a very large general frame of reference, or maybe a very small specific frame of reference. That is, I can have a frame of reference that says friends, but so I have whole patterns of behaviors around who is a friend, how to relate to them, what I expect. But within that, I'll have a frame of reference for a specific friend. What is a specific friend? How do I behave? What can I expect? What do I do? That is, frames of reference can be nested inside of each other, or very large, and they can be very large in general, and in fact even causes problems because it's so general. So it's this, they're not just simple things that we kind of embrace, but they're nested. Some of them are very specific, some of them are very general. Regardless, all of these things are triggered by these unconscious cues. So that's what our perception did, is it triggered a frame of reference. We took in all of this data, we tried to just figure out unconsciously, pick out the things that were most important that would be clues or a cue to a frame of reference, and then we implement this frame of reference. So that's what tells us what all the sensory data means. It tells us what to pay attention to. So if our frame of reference tells us this is a classroom, it then tells us, well, ignore the artwork on the walls. This is not an art gallery. This is a classroom or a lecture. It might happen to have artwork on the walls, but that is a peripheral aspect. It's not central to what's going on. That is, the classroom frame of reference tells us exclude that. And it also tells us then how should we behave. That is, a classroom has whole standards of language, dress, and behavior. And what I find quite fascinating is they really vary from program to program, school to school, culture to culture. That is, when I was teaching at an undergraduate liberal arts school in out here in Abbotsford, I typically wore jeans and a t-shirt. Well, which was absolutely essential. But when teaching at a business school, I did wear, I've decided to stop, but I used to wear a tie and a suit. That it's a business classroom means one is a different frame of reference than an undergraduate arts classroom, which is a different frame of reference. And so then the dress, the behavior changes quite a lot. That's true for students as well. Everybody behaves based on how they perceive the frame of reference suggesting things. And if you walk into a space and realize you are not properly attired, or you're not behaving properly for the frame of reference, you often feel embarrassed or even shamed. That is, you've broken a moral norm that goes with the frame of reference. That is, these frames of reference are not just neutral. They have deep emotional connections. They are about guiding our behavior, and they can tell us really important things about us and whether or not we're the right person or what it takes to be a right person. That is, they become very powerful guides to our behavior. And then, and this is a critical piece, these frames of reference tell us what the expected outcomes should be. So if I walk into a classroom, my expectation is that knowledge will be an outcome. Now, what happens if there is no knowledge gained? You see, that tells me that's really interesting, because a classroom, if I have decided that this is a classroom and I gain no knowledge, then I go, well, this is either a bad classroom or I'm a bad person. We don't ask the question whether or not my assessment was correct in the first place. That is, it could have been a meditation room and it was simply about being quiet, and some people kept on talking. No, we didn't perceive it that way. So our question was, well, this is a weird classroom. Something went wrong. Did the instructor never show up, or were they not properly prepared, or did I get the wrong information? Did I go to the wrong classroom? Like, something went wrong here. This classroom didn't work right. That is, every time we implement a frame of reference, it isn't just that we know what's going on, it sets us up for expectations. That is, perceptions are always about outcomes. Now, I'll just throw in a side piece here that's not in my notes, and this is my current thinking on this. The philosopher Michel Meyer works very much on the premise that human beings are fundamentally about solving problems. That is, that's what a human is. If you want to define a human, it's somebody who sets up and solves problems, which would be an interesting definition of consciousness as well. But that what we're seeing here is that a frame of reference tells us then what class of problems we can expect to be solved. And I am curious, I am suspicious that that is in fact their function, that if we start looking at frames of reference more thoroughly, we'll find that the brain is fundamentally oriented towards what class of problems does this space, time, whatever situation lead to the resolution. And that we value them based on the categories of solutions and how those solutions fit together with our long-term strategic needs as individuals. Anyway, I'm just curious about that. I don't know, that's pure speculation on my part, but it's certainly, if I were to be a researcher in the field, that's where I would be going. Are frames of references finally organized by the problems that we expect that frame of reference to lead to the solution? Anyway, it's just an interesting speculative thought. But regardless, they do tell us about, once we've cued a frame of reference, that is, we've got one in place, we do then kind of know what to expect, what's going on, what we should be doing. That is, we now have organized perceptions. We have clear perceptions. We have ways of thinking about what is going on. We can now understand it. So it's frames of reference. Now, I'll just note that this was a concept developed by a psychologist named Goffman back in the 60s and 70s, who did the pioneering research on this, and just how much very specific items in an environment are what we pick up on. So he did a lot of interesting research on how we choose which frame of reference to apply. And there's some fascinating research on this. That is, the same informational clues can trigger different frames of reference depending on how they're related to each other. Anyway, lots of interesting stuff there. But the issue here is frames of references are how we come up with perceptions. And perceptions are what we then function with. So we've got sensory data. It doesn't mean anything. And it's a frame of reference that finally gives it its meaning by which we then organize our behavior and life. But if you start thinking about it, that's not necessarily the best way to organize our lives. But anyway, we'll come back to that. So here's the process. A little diagram that I think might help. I like diagrams. So if you look on the left side, you've got sensory data, all of it just coming in at you. Out of that sensory data, specific clues or cues are triggered. Clues, in fact, are triggered in the brain. That is, this is an important thing. Somehow, for some reason, my intuition and memory tells me this is important, turns it into a cue to a frame of reference. Once I've got a specific pattern in the sensory data that I intuit, I then have the cue for a specific frame of reference that allows me to organize everything that's happening. So, for example, if I walk into a classroom and there's art all over the walls, well, is it a classroom or is it an art gallery? Well, and then I spot another fellow student across the room and I go, ah, that is my clue. This is, in fact, a classroom, because that person wouldn't go to an art gallery. That person goes to a classroom, which is what I thought, because that's what's on my schedule, what I thought I was attending. And so you pick up a particular clue that tells you to cue frame of reference, classroom. And then you are in that frame and you ignore the work on the walls. So those cues tell you which frame of reference, and it could be like home is one whole frame of reference, work is another, going to a party, going to school. Each of these is its own frame of reference, and each one of them can in fact contain many smaller frames of reference to deal with the very specific aspects of each of those larger frames of reference. So school, you'll find, as I'm certainly you have found, every classroom is different. That is, and you can often develop a specific frame of reference for thinking about specific profs, specific subjects, particular schools. Everything has its own way of organizing a frame of reference for that specific situation. So each of them then, once we've got the correct frame of reference, where is it correct? Well, anyway, we have a frame of reference with all of its stuff that is inside of it, which leads to then to our perceptions and our ability to function in that space-time. That is, so we've gone from sensory data through kind of feeling our way through it, trying to figure out what are the clues that give us the cues, to a frame of reference. And then the frame of reference organizes the information in such a way that we have a concrete perception, something we can work with, something we can now act on, integrate, use, solve problems. That is, that frame of, without the frame of reference though, we wander lost. We just don't know what's going on. We have to just sit there, wait. So I see this sometimes with students who come to Canada from foreign countries, and all of a sudden they are involved in something. Is this a classroom? How is this a classroom? I don't understand that it's a classroom. They sit there quite lost until they finally figure out the patterns of, well, this is what a classroom genuinely is like in Canada. I've been to 3 or 4 of them, and they all seem to behave the same way. It's like nothing I'm used to. And why do professors assign assignments instead of exams? Like, this makes no sense. All of my courses have always had final exams, and all of a sudden in Canada, they're giving me lots of assignments that are due even on a weekly basis. This is crazy. This is not a classroom. Well, after you've seen 3 or 4 of those, you begin to go, oh yes, well, this is a classroom in Canada. You have a new frame of reference for how to organize your student behavior. It can be quite a shock. That is, your past frame of reference did not accurately tell you how to behave, what to expect, what problems were to be solved. You have to develop a new one as you work your way through the situation. It's based on old ones, but now it's a new one. A new perception that emerges over time, again, through memory, and ultimately becomes part of your intuitions. So this is the process. Where are we at? So I am trying to decide, what do I want to do next? Yeah, I think I'll end here. With this slide. There are about 5 more slides, and we'll pick that up next week. So let me just talk then about the negative side effect of frames, which is that they are also filters. The fact that they organize your data input into a perception means that they are working really hard to cut out other information. That is, once you have a frame of reference, you start rejecting any stimuli that does not fit that frame of reference. So there could be really important information in that data stream, but once you have a frame of reference, you can no longer see, feel, experience that important data. It's gone. It has been filtered out by the frame of reference. So if you're in what you think is a classroom and you set yourself up to learn, but it turns out it's actually the local indoctrination center for the religious cult, all of a sudden you have opened your mind up to stuff that is not, in fact, good for you. Well, unless you're an advocate of that religious cult. But what you've got is that your brain is opened in terms of a classroom environment, but it is now closed to the be skeptical of what this information is, because the classroom environment is for learning, not for being skeptical. And that'll lead to some interesting stuff coming up in future slides. So we just leave out all that information. We don't see it. That is, the moment we have a frame of reference, it filters out all the information that, or all the potential information, because it's not real information. We simply aren't taking it in. It's just noise. But it might be it's important. but our frame of reference doesn't give it room. Now, frames of reference also, because they emerge from memory and culture and previous experiences, have built into them a wide range of prejudices, biases, and assumptions. So that as soon as we apply a frame, we are now applying a whole basket load of prejudices, biases, and assumptions that are going to guide our thinking in ways that might be helpful, might be useful, but also might be very distorting. That is, the frame of reference has a lot of material that comes with it. And turns out to be very significant as well, a frame of reference allows us to avoid looking for important information that might not be present. That is, a frame of reference acts to fill in the spaces. That is, we might be missing something that would be normal, and we ignore it because the frame of reference tells us what's really going on, so we don't have to miss things that really are significant, but are missing just in that situation. Anyway, we're going to come back to some of this stuff, but I just want to leave us here with this sense that frames of reference are essential. That's the only way we can get to a perception of what's going on. But a frame of reference is not neutral. It's got a whole basket of stuff with it that shapes our thinking and might well shape our thinking incorrectly. And that's where we'll be going next week. So I want to stop at that and open this up to discussion, questions. I can go back and forth with the slides and see where things go, but I'm going to stop the recording at this point. If I can get there.